I don't know how these things got started in those days, but I was a little kid, and I remember suddenly, like one day, I was at PE or something, and one of the boys, who was kind of a popular kid, just started talking about this, and I had never heard it, but it just kind of spread like wildfire, very briefly, a week or so, and that's pretty much the way it was. It really took hold quickly. They had radio shows about it and everything, but it did. But now, of course, now it endures decades later. But I think that's because, and I don't know where that kid heard it from. I don't know where. I suspect maybe he read an article or heard it on a radio show. Because the one thing I think that uh, I don't think can be denied, both Bob and I both think the clues are there. There are clues there, and
Yeah.
I know the Beatles would deny it. So I'm not saying that the Beatles, but I don't know who put the clues there. But to me, I think it's pretty obvious. I just give you one example that McCartney, I think when it was they were, how was it? When I'm 64, there's a video for one of the songs I think in Magical Mystery Tour, and McCartney has a black rose,
Yes.
and all the rest of them had red roses. And he later it was addressed later, and they said, well, it's because we ran out of red roses. But the problem is, you can see as they're walking around, McCartney and all of them are throwing all these roses all around everywhere. They had tons of extra roses. So I don't think that explanation holds pat. The same thing for the famous Abbey Road cover.
Yes.
When McCartney is, for those not familiar, it's McCartney is supposed to be the corpse because he's not wearing shoes, and Lennon's supposed to be the preacher, and George is the grave digger, and I guess is Ringo the audience or something. I don't know, or something like that. But McCartney, obviously, the focus is on him. But he actually addressed it later, and his explanation makes no sense because he said, I was wearing sandals and it was really hot that day. So you took off your sandals so the road, the asphalt would burn your feet more? I mean, so I don't know if they were playing into it by doing that, and people grasp hold of that. And you have people, Lennon himself, especially, who was vehemently, denied it a couple times and said, this is ridiculous, how stupid, people believing this stuff. But then he played around with the fans too, in Glass Onion, when he says, here's another clue for you all. The walrus was Paul. So he's still throwing that out there.
Right. Right.
I don't. And also, in How Do You Sleep, and his attack on McCartney, he says those freaks was right when they said you were dead. So he's still, he's kind of poking fun at it, but he's still mentioning it. So I think that for whatever reason, maybe it was a public relations thing, but it sure worked as a kid. I can tell you, because at that point I was little and I'd kind of gotten over because I wasn't sophisticated musically enough, but I still love the early Beatles. That's Beatlemania. That's what I love still. But the pop stuff, but they'd kind of gotten out of it. So I had kind of stopped buying their records as because I was still a little kid. So, but that rejuvenated my interest hearing this. So if it was a public relation campaign, it worked with me. I don't know how many others.
It worked indeed. Well, the fact that we really can't definitively pin down how it started, and as I mentioned, without the internet, unless you have like the machine behind you feeding that, it's hard to imagine how that would have endured. There are some rumors that somebody wrote about it in I don't know if it's a rumor. It's actually, I think it was true. It was written about in one of the a college newspaper, I think in Iowa.
Yes.
Someone penned an article on it. And then, but that person claims, well, but it wasn't my work. It was based on something that someone else told me that he heard out on the West Coast. And it's like you mentioned the glass onion. It's like an onion. You start peeling away the layers, and there's just layers. There's no onion.
Well, and one of the people we talked to was Fred LaBeouf, that Bob talked to, who is generally given credit for inventing. But then there are stories of it being before him, and he also got the idea by listening to someone call into a radio station and talking about it. So it was out there, and he's credited with inventing a lot of the clues or noticing the clues, because again, he didn't invent them, he didn't put them on the record covers. So he noticed these things, like with and you can see in the back cover of the book, we have McCartney's in the blue coat facing his back. It's possible you could do that, but it's interesting. This McCartney's the one they chose to have it. And that was, again, when people were really starting to notice these clues. And of course, if you look at the bass, on the cover of Sgt. Pepper's, their most famous album, iconic cover with all the, the pictures of people and so forth. And there's at the bottom, there's a bass that's made out of a funeral wreath.
Yes.
And so it's I don't know what that means, but it certainly seems like there were lots of clues there people could have noticed. And again, I don't think, I'm not saying this, I don't think this happened. It would have been incredibly, even someone like me who, I listened to John Armstrong's Harvey and Lee theory, that there were two Oswalds from the time they were kids. He's got a lot of evidence for it, but it would take something, almost something like that, where you found somebody that was an exact duplicate and kind of kept them for some reason, because it's, why would rock stars die all the time? I mean, from Buddy Holly and all the people, even during that era, that died. And I don't think it ever occurred to anybody to replace them with a duplicate. So but it's an interesting theory, and people are still talking about it.
I just want to, if I might, I want to just share a little bit of the foreword here by Jude Sutherland Kessler. You mentioned her, and she's the author of the Lennon series. And do you mind if I read a little bit here?
No, of course. Please.
Okay, she writes, in their book, The Walrus Was Ringo, noted authors Alan Clayson and Spencer Lee wryly comment, quote, a habit of reading hidden meanings in record grooves left the runway when the music of certain pop stars was elevated from ephemera to holy writ. This was, of course, during the time that Roy Orbison called the crazy late 60s, when it got real weird. Politics, music, fashion. Everything went crazy, sort of. A classic example was the man who was so obsessed with analyzing Bob Dylan lyrics in order to prove that Dylan's stimulant intake affected his muse, that the researcher placed a wanted advertisement in a New York Underground magazine for a Dylan urine sample. So that really kind of sums it up, doesn't it? That
Yeah.
people imbue so much meaning in these musical artists. I don't know.
And Jude is talking there about A.J. Weberman, who I've communicated with several times, and very, I'm not sure how sane he is, but he's an interesting character. And he was the first garbologist, and he was obsessed with Dylan to the extent that he was going through his trash, and he still is. He's my Facebook friend, and some of the stuff he's written, I mean, he just comes up with calling Dylan a Holocaust denier, just ridiculous stuff that has no basis in reality, but he's obsessed with the guy. But he also co-wrote a very good book on the JFK assassination coup d'etat in America with the late Michael Canfield. So that's why I had an interest in him, because he's from that world as well. So right. There are other people like that kind of have different interests, but yeah, and certainly Dylan, for somebody, I was a huge Dylan fan, even bigger than the Beatles. When I became sophisticated enough, I really gravitated to him. And as an aspiring poet and writer and songwriter, I just, was obsessed with his lyrics myself. So I could understand people trying to think, what was he talking about there? At midnight, all the agents and the superhuman crew and heart attack machines, and, Desolation Row alone, just listening to that, it's like, it really, warmed the cockles of the young conspiracy theorist's heart.
Yes.
Yeah. So I can understand why people do. And with the Beatles, of course, you had it was a little bit on a different level, because they weren't writing those kinds of lyrics. I don't think, not to that level.
They weren't political. No, not at all.
No. But so, I mean, Lennon became, but once Lennon became, I think he became the focus of, but it's interesting that it was Paul, because most of the people that, that they started this rumor about, but yeah, so that's why, we wanted to do the book, because we think that there's still interest in it. We'll see. Hopefully there is. And certainly we got a lot of people that are renowned in some way in music and entertainment that were interested enough to answer our questions.
From Strawberry Fields to Abbey Road, a Billy Shears story. Donald Jeffries, co-authored by Bob Wilson. Just explain the Billy Shears reference, if you could.
Well, Billy Shears is the guy, and again, he's I think also known as William Campbell. He's usually referred to by people as fake Paul. So they call him Paul, not Fall. They say, look at the difference look at Paul's ears versus Fall's ears, and they'll analyze these photographs. Very similar again to the way people analyze photographs of Lee Harvey Oswald. It reminded me of that. Very subtle little differences that if you look at anything close enough, maybe you can see it. But Billy Shears was his name, and of course, Billy Shears is mentioned in the lyrics of Sgt. Pepper, and it's basically saying it's Ringo, basically in the lyrics. So I don't know. if you believe the theory, the idea was that it's hiding in plain sight. They decided to tell you, hey, we're going to throw his name out there. That's how obvious we're getting. But I don't. And there, of course, there are people that I think you've seen. We didn't go into that in the book, but I've seen videos that talk about whoever Fall is, Billy Shears, William Campbell, that people went to his house because he's alive and, asked him, and he supposedly kind of gave, really odd grin, and just, so I don't know. But he doesn't look like the guy that's McCartney now. So if that's Billy Shears, I don't, it's got a lot of intricacies to the theory. And like all theories, they don't necessarily explain everything, because I don't know who that guy was. That's clearly not McCartney, or
Right.
the fake McCartney, if you're saying that. But but it's got a lot of elements to it, and that's, generally speaking, is what they refer to. That's the guy who replaced him. And supposedly, I think initially their explanation was he was the winner of a McCartney lookalike contest. And if that's the case, yeah, I could see why he won. I don't think you could get anybody that could look more like him than he does.